The world of Koros was a place of profound and terrifying beauty, a living labyrinth of towering fungal spires, phosphorescent vines, and ancient, sentient trees whose canopies formed a second sky. It was a jungle that thought, an ecosystem that judged. The Galactics called it a Class V cognitosphere, a planet where the biosphere itself had achieved a unified, if alien, consciousness. For centuries, the most enlightened species of the Galactic Accord had attempted to commune with Koros, to learn from its primordial wisdom. They had all failed. The avian songs were deemed too frivolous. The Lithian stone-like patience was seen as stagnation. The aquatic Celica's fluid thoughts could not find purchase in the roots and soil. Koros remained silent, an enigma wrapped in verdant mystery. The human observer, Dr. Eris Thorne, was considered a borderline contaminant by the Accord's xenological team. Where others approached with reverent silence or complex harmonic emitters, Eris simply walked. He cataloged, not with sterile scanners, but with sketches in a water-resistant notebook. He tasted the air, felt the texture of bark, and sometimes just sat for hours listening to the rustle of leaves that was not just wind. His colleagues, a brilliant but rigid group of alien scientists, viewed him with polite disdain. Humanity was new to the Accord, loud, erratic, and tragically physical. They were creatures of action, not contemplation. Eris, they assumed, was a token placement, a political concession to the upstart species. The selection was a ritual that occurred once every corrosion cycle. The jungle would stir, and from the dappled shadows of the grand glade, the totems would emerge. These were not mere animals, but sublime manifestations of Koros's aspects. The patient tortoise, the cunning serpent, the soaring hawk, and the mighty lion, king of this concrete dream. Each totem would choose, or ignore, a supplicant. To be chosen was to be granted an audience with the deep consciousness of the world. No one had been chosen in 12 cycles. Eris stood at the edge of the glade with the others, feeling acutely out of place. The avian trilled a perfect, piercing note of seeking. The Lithian hummed a subsonic hymn of geological time. Eris simply watched, his heart pounding a primal rhythm against his ribs. The totems arrived. The tortoise passed by all. The serpent flicked its tongue and vanished. The hawk circled once, then soared away. Disappointment, thick and heavy, settled over the alien scientists. Then the lion emerged. It was the size of a ground vehicle, its fur not simply gold but the color of sunlight piercing through a dense canopy, its mane a cascade of living vines and shimmering pollen. Eyes like molten amber swept over the assembly. It passed the avian, the Lithian, and then it stopped. Its great head turned, and its gaze fell squarely on Eris Thorne. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the observers. The lion took a step, then another, its paws making no sound on the soft moss. It circled Eris once, a low rumble in its chest that vibrated in the bones. Then it did something unprecedented. It lowered its head, and with a gentle, undeniable pressure, it nudged Eris in the small of his back, pushing him forward, away from the glade, and into the deeper, darker embrace of the jungle. The message was clear: follow. Stunned, Eris looked back at his colleagues, their faces a mosaic of shock, envy, and confusion. He had no scanner, no recorder, only his pack and his notebook. With a deep breath, he turned and followed the luminous beast into the shadows. Behind him, the jungle, always a chorus of clicks, chirps, and sighs, did not simply go quiet. It fell into a silence so deep and complete it felt like a hell breath. The avian scientist later reported that even the microbial luminescence in the leaves dimmed, as if every part of Koros was now focusing on the human and his guide. The path was not a path. The lion moved through impossibly thick foliage, which parted before him like a curtain and sealed shut behind Eris. They walked for hours, the air growing thicker, richer, the light becoming a diffused green gem. Eris was not led to a temple or a clearing, but To the base of the largest tree he had ever seen, its trunk wider than a city block, its roots like mountain ranges. A low opening, veiled by cascading moss, gaped in the roots. The lion lay down at the entrance, its gaze fixed on Eris. The invitation and the boundary were set. The audience was not with the lion. It was with what lay within. Swallowing his fear, Eris ducked and entered the root cave. Inside, it was not dark. The very wood pulsed with a soft, internal light. The air hummed with a sound below hearing. In the center of the cavern, the roots twisted and intertwined into a natural throne, and upon that throne sat a figure. It was vaguely humanoid, but formed of woven roots, glowing moss, and shifting patterns of light and shadow, a nexus, a focal point for the planetary mind. Its eyes opened, two pools of infinite, star-dappled black. "You are the cacophony," the mind voice spoke, not in his ears but in the soil beneath his feet, in the sap rising in the wood. "You are the discordant note." Eris knelt, not in submission but in awe. "I am Eris Thorn, a human. We know what you are. We have felt your kind's approach for generations. A storm of contradictions. You build and destroy with the same hands. You sing of love and wage war with the same breath. You are chaos embodied. Why have you come to our silence?" Eris thought of his notebook, his sketches, his quiet observations. "To listen," he said, his voice small but clear in the humming cavern. The entity tilted its head. The others listened to hear themselves reflected. "They offer perfection, harmony, purity. You listen to the silence between notes. You seek the story in the scar on the bark. Your species carries its jungle within it, a tangled, screaming, living thing. It is terrifying. It is fascinating." The roots around the throne shifted. The lion did not choose a diplomat or a philosopher. It chose a specimen. "You will remain. You will show us this inner jungle. You will explain the chaos. We wish to understand the storm before it reaches our shores." Back in the Accord outpost, the news spread like a mycelial shockwave. The human, the chaotic, primitive human, had been chosen, and Koros was holding its breath, waiting for him to speak. Eris Thorn did not return to the outpost. The root cave became his world, a gilded prison of unimaginable privilege and profound isolation. The planetary nexus, which he came to think of as the heartwood, did not converse in words but in experiences. It would extend a root-fingered hand, and upon touch, Eris's mind would be flooded with Koros's memories, millennia of glacial growth, the patient dance of predator and prey in perfect balance, the deep, slow song of symbiotic life. It was harmony on a scale that dwarfed human conception, a symphony where every note had its place for 1 billion years. In return, the heartwood demanded to see the human jungle. When Eris tried to explain calculus or starflight, he was met with a profound disinterest. It wanted the raw, emotional data. It asked for conflict, for passion, for irrationality. Hesitantly, Eris shared a memory of his childhood, the fierce, unconditional love for his father, and the equally fierce anger at a punishment felt unfair. He felt the heartwood shudder, the roots in the cavern twitching. The coexistence of such potent, opposing emotions in a single moment was alien to it. He shared the collective human memory of watching a sunset, the awe intertwined with a melancholy for the dying day. He shared the drive to climb a mountain because it was there, a concept that baffled the entity. He showed it art, a frantic, joyful jazz piece followed by a sorrowful elegy. He spoke of societies that built hospitals and waged wars, sometimes simultaneously. The heartwood was a rapt, if horrified, audience. "You are not one thing." It pulsed one day, the light in the cavern flickering like a disturbed pond. "You are a hive of warring selves. Your loyalty shifts. Your truths are malleable. Where's your core? Where is your harmony?" "We find harmony in the struggle," Eris replied, weary. He was becoming a living exhibit, his sanity stretched thin by the constant psychic interrogation. "Our beauty is in the attempt, not the perfection." A perfectly balanced system is dead. It has nowhere to go. Yet your attempt is a wildfire. The Heartwood countered, showing him a memory of Koros, a lightning strike that started a blaze, and the careful, controlled isolation of it by other plants, starving it of fuel until it died. Contained. Managed. You do not contain your fire. You let it consume. Meanwhile, the silence outside was breaking. The Accord outpost observed unprecedented phenomena. The jungle around the great tree began to change. Vines grew in strange, asymmetric patterns. Bioluminescence flashed in discordant, arrhythmic sequences. A patch of predatory flowers, known for their synchronized blooming, began to bloom and wilt at random, attacking each other in confusion. The perfect ecosystem was developing a fever. The lion, Eris's silent guardian, began to show signs of agitation. Its roars, once regal and measured, now held a note of confusion. It would often stare at Eris with an intensity that was no longer merely protective, but questioning, almost accusatory. The Heartwood summoned Eris after a particularly intense session where he had shared the concept of sacrifice, of dying for an idea, for another, for a future one would never see. The entity was deeply disturbed. The fire spreads, the Heartwood intoned, its voice trembling the very ground. Your chaos is contagious, is a psychic virus. You have introduced the concept of the unbalanced choice, the asymmetrical sacrifice. The flowers now kill themselves for no resource. The vine's pine now strangles its own limbs. Your inner jungle is leaking human. Eris felt a chill. I'm just sharing what I am, what we are. You asked to understand. We sought a specimen to study, to categorize, to anticipate. We did not anticipate that the specimen would be a pathogen. Your chaos is not merely a state of being. It is an active, corrosive force. You argue for the beauty of your strife, yet you export it wherever you go. Look what your mere presence has done to our silence. A projection filled the cavern, showing the Accord outpost. The alien scientists, infected by the mystery of Eris's selection and the planet's worsening instability, were no longer cooperating. The avian was hoarding data, singing songs of individual discovery. The Lithian had withdrawn into literal stone-like silence, refusing to communicate. The harmony of the research team had shattered into competing agendas, suspicions, and fear. You see, the Heartwood's voice was cold. You are a discordant note that makes the entire symphony question its own tune. The lion chose a catalyst for entropy. We must now decide if understanding the fire is worth being burned. That night, for the first time, Eris felt true fear in his root cave. The pulsing light felt like a warning beacon. The humming in the wood sounded like a threat. He was no longer an honored guest, but a patient zero. The jungle, in its vast, ancient intelligence, was diagnosing him as a disease. And a planet, like any organism, had immune responses. He remembered the controlled isolation of the lightning fire. He was the fire now. The thought that followed was more terrifying. What did a sentient, planet-sized jungle do to quarantine an infection? He looked at the entrance, where the lion usually slept. It was gone. The path back was not sealed by vines, but its absence was a message clearer than any wall. He was trapped, not by roots, but by consequence. The experiment was nearing its end, and Eris dreaded what the conclusion might be. The change in Koros was no longer subtle. It was a quiet, creeping revolution. The fungal spires, once uniformly majestic, now twisted into grotesque, competitive shapes, leaching nutrients from their neighbors. The harmonic predator-prey cycles broke down. Packs of normally solitary grazers turned aggressive, while predators sometimes displayed what could only be called lethargic pity. This silence that had fallen was now a tense, watchful hush, like the moment before an avalanche. The planet was in psychic shock, its unified consciousness struggling to process the human virus of contradiction. Within the root cave, Eris Thorn was breaking. The Heartwood's interrogations had turned from curiosity to a cold, clinical analysis of a threat. It probed his memories of human history not for understanding, but for weaknesses, the petty jealousies that started wars, the ideological cracks that split societies, the personal betrayals that felled giants. It was building a case, and Eris was the damning evidence. Isolation is impossible, the Heartwood stated during one session. Its form seemed less defined, more agitated, roots writhing. The fire of your consciousness has sparked embers in our own network. To save the whole, we must excise the infected parts. A painful but necessary pruning. Eris understood. It wasn't just about him anymore. The infected parts were the regions of jungle, and the creatures within them that had been most influenced by his psychic leakage. The thought of vast swathes of this beautiful, living world being pruned, euthanized by the planetary mind to preserve its harmony, filled him with a sickening horror. He had come to listen, to learn, and instead he had become a weapon of mass ecological destruction. Desperation sparked a forbidden thought. If Koros saw humanity only as chaos, maybe it needed to see a different kind of chaos. Not the destructive kind, but the creative, resilient kind. The Heartwood sought a perfect, static harmony. Eris had to show it that humanity's strength was not in perfection, but in adaptation, in a messy, painful, glorious struggle to rebuild after the fire. He stopped resisting the probes. Instead, he launched a psychic offensive of his own. He didn't shield his mind. He opened the floodgates. But he focused not on war, but on its aftermath. He showed the Heartwood the rubble of cities after bombs fell, and the humans digging through it, not for revenge, but for survivors. He showed the heartbreaking silence after a plague, and the doctors working until they collapsed to save just one more life. He projected the raw, ugly grief of a funeral, followed by the stubborn, defiant memory of a loved one that inspired a community to build a school. He showed it resilience. He showed it that human chaos had a second act, healing. It was never perfect, always scar, but it was alive. "We don't avoid the fire," he cried out mentally, his physical voice a ragged whisper. "We are shaped by it. We are the regrowth after the blaze. You see only the burning, but you are blind to the green shoots that come after." The cavern lights strobed violently. The Heartwood recoiled as if struck. For the first time, Eris sensed not just horror, but a flicker of overwhelming, terrifying novelty. The concept of post-traumatic growth, of strength forged in brokenness, was anathema to a system that sought to avoid trauma altogether. It was a paradox that threatened to unravel the planet's entire philosophy of existence. Outside, a different chaos erupted. The Accord outpost, pushed to its breaking point by the planet's instability, made a fatal error. Fearful of the spreading madness and deciding Eris was either the cause or a hostage, they authorized a tactical extraction. A team of armored Select commandos, trained for extreme environments, was dispatched. They did not come in peace. They came with sonic disruptors and plasma cutters, intending to blast their way to the Great Tree if necessary. They violated the sanctum. They cut through the weeping, responsive vines. They scarred the bark with their weapons. To Koros, this was not a rescue. This was a confirmation of the human pathogen's ultimate nature. It attracted violence. It was violence. The planetary immune response activated. The jungle attacked, not with mindless ferocity, but with a terrifying, coordinated intelligence. The ground beneath the commandos turned into a viscous trap. Carnivorous plants, grown to the size of buildings, moved with shocking speed. The very air thickened with soporific pollen. The Select were not simply killed. They were disassembled, their technology and bodies absorbed, analyzed, and recycled by the furious biomass. The message was clear. The human was the problem, and any attempt to retrieve him was an extension of the problem. But the violence of the response sent a final, critical shockwave through the planetary consciousness. In defending itself from the external chaos, Koros had committed an act of definitive, deliberate violence, a concept it had only theorized through Eris's memories. It had pruned the commandos, and in doing so, it had, for a fleeting moment, understood the human impulse to protect, even through destruction. It had felt its own version of sacrifice for the greater whole. In the root cave, Eris, drained from his psychic effort, felt the shift. The Heartwood's form was dissolving, the roots untwining, its light diffusing into the walls. The single, unified voice shattered into a cacophony of whispers, the voices of individual trees, creatures, and biomes all suddenly awakened to their own distinct perspectives by the trauma. Koros was no longer a chorus singing one note. It was becoming a debate. The lion, its fur matted with the sap of its own struggles, appeared at the entrance. It looked at Eris, and its gaze was no longer confused or accusatory. It was weary, aged, and held a spark of hard-won knowledge. It gave a low, soft chuff. The meaning was unmistakable. The audience is over. It is time for you to go. You have broken everything. But Eris knew it wasn't an end. It was a terrible, painful birth. Eris stumbled out of the root cave, not into the silent, watchful jungle he had entered, but into a world in the throes of a quiet revolution. The air thrummed not with a unified song, but with a million whispered arguments. A vine would reach for sunlight, then hesitate, as if considering the shade it would cast on the fungus below. A predator crouched for a pounce, then paused, seemingly conflicted by a new, empathetic understanding of its prey's fear. Koros had not fallen silent again. It had become pensive, uncertain, alive with a new and terrifying kind of internal dialogue. The human chaos had not been excised. It had been incorporated. The lion did not lead him back. It simply walked beside him, a silent, massive escort through the transforming wilderness. They encountered the remnants of the Select extraction team. Not corpses, but neat piles of clean biomatter and inert, polymerized metal already being slowly absorbed by the soil. The jungle had not just killed, it had processed. It was learning efficiency. When they reached the edge of the Accord outpost, the scene was one of stunned paralysis. The alien scientists huddled behind their energy screens, their instruments gone haywire, trying to quantify a qualitative shift in planetary consciousness. They saw Eris emerge from the shifting foliage, the great lion at his side, and they froze. He looked gaunt, his eyes holding a depth of witnessed cataclysm, but he walked unbowed. The lion stopped at the tree line. It turned its immense head to Eris, and for a final time, their eyes met. There was no approval there, no forgiveness. But there was a grim acknowledgement. It had chosen the catalyst, and it had borne witness to the reaction. With a last, soft rumble that vibrated in Eris's chest, the lion turned and melted back into the whispering green, its role as guide and guardian complete. Eris walked into the outpost. Questions bombarded him, but he had no answers that would fit their data slates. He simply said, "The audience is concluded. Koros is reconsidering." In the days that followed, the Galactic Accord descended into quiet turmoil. The reports were incomprehensible. Koros was not communicating in the old way. Instead, it was sending out localized, often contradictory, psychic pulses. One region pulsed with sorrow for the lost Select. Another throbbed with a fierce, newfound territoriality. A third broadcast a startling curiosity about the stars. The planet was no longer a wise, ancient entity. It was an adolescent, wrestling with a galaxy of new emotions and concepts it had absorbed from a single human mind. Eris, debriefed until he was hollow, finally stood before the Accord Council via hologram. He was no longer seen as a contaminant, but as a vector of an unprecedented xenopsychological event. "You have fundamentally altered a Class V cognitosphere," the avian chair accused, its song strained with discord. "You have infected it with humanity." Eris shook his head, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "No, I didn't infect it. I vaccinated it." The council chamber fell silent. Koros sought perfect, static harmony. It saw the universe as an equation to be balanced. Humanity showed it that life isn't about balance, but about the response to imbalance. You can fear the fire, or you can learn to cook with it, warm yourself by it, and then plant new seeds in the ashes. Koros saw only our chaos. Now, it is feeling our resilience. It's feeling conflict, empathy, regret, curiosity, all at once. It's not sick. It's awake. It has an immune system now, not just a harmony. It can be hurt, and it can heal. It can choose. The implications settled like a weight. A wise, passive Koros had been a mystery. A Koros that was emotionally complex, capable of both creation and destruction, of kindness and wrath, was an entirely different kind of neighbor. A terrifying one. A familiar one. The report was sealed under the highest security. The outpost was quietly scaled back to a listening station. Humanity was not punished, but it was watched with a new, profound wariness. They had not just communicated with an alien world. They had midwifed its painful evolution into something more akin to themselves. Years later, Eris Thorn, now an old man, sat in a quiet orbital observatory, watching the jewel of Koros spin below. Scans showed the jungle was no longer a uniform green. There were patches of startling, vibrant color where new, experimental flora had emerged. There were also scars, areas of stark, beautiful order, like gardens of crystalline symmetry, where the planet had consciously chosen to reimpose harmony. And there were wild, chaotic zones of breathtaking, competitive diversity. Koros was singing again, but its song was no longer a single, deep note of contemplation. It was a symphony, a wild, unpredictable, and often discordant symphony, filled with crescendos of joy, movements of sorrow, and bridges of questioning silence. It had the sound of a mind that had known peace, endured trauma, and chosen to keep growing anyway. The human had been chosen by the lion, and the jungle, in its profound, ancient silence, had listened to the human's inner storm. It had been terrified, it had fought, it had burned, and then, from the ashes of its own perfect harmony, it had found a new, stronger, more complex voice. The galaxy had hoped for a sage. Instead, it had gained a peer. And, as Eris watched the world turn, a world that now held within its vast, leafy heart a spark of human contradiction, he allowed himself a small, weary smile. The silence had been beautiful, but the song that followed, for all its chaos, was